Welcome back, listeners, to Lost and Searching. Today, we're chatting to Tashan. Tashan is a coach, a marketer, and a performer. Is success to do with effort, talent, or luck? What do those words actually even mean, and are we the ones getting in our way more than anything else? Join us today as we go through all of that and more, chatting about what it means to have abundant energy, how we can return to possibility, what it means to design a self-portrait, giving yourself your own set of keys to your success, and so much more. Let's get into the show, and I hope you enjoy the journey. I'd love to start with you is to understand what you think the recipe for success is. Do you think that it's talent to do with effort, to do with luck? If it's a combination of the three, like what is the balance of the three?
Yeah.
Where do you think this comes from or is?
So I love that as a question because as someone who's quite hard on themselves, I spend a lot of time thinking about what success is. Also, as a coach, is something that I just talk to people about. And for me, at first we have to kind of break down what's the definition of success. So you have almost a systemic definition of what's handed down to us in like, we live in like a business orientated society, right? An outcome based society, monetary based society, with like, so having things, doing things. And so then there's that idea of that's a story that's given to us. Then there's this idea of, well, what does success mean to me? And I don't know, quite often our definitions of success are handed to us. If I think of my own personal definition, it's a sense of progress. It's thinking about what my values are. And it's thinking about perhaps a North Star of where I'd like to go and heading towards that. That sounds quite easy in reality, as all I have to do is make progress along the way towards this North Star. And invariably I'm doing that all the time. But actually, when I start going through that journey, there's all these voices and expectations and stories that I'm telling myself along the way. I guess to your point around the story, like a very Lord of the Rings-esque vibe. It's like this fellowship of where we're on this story and we're on this route together, but there's all these different villains that we need to face along the way. But there is ultimately this thing that we're trying to do, right, which is the ring and take it to Mordor. I think that's the right reference. Who knows? Someone will at me if it's not.
I think that's right. Yeah. Sounds about right.
And so these distractions along the way, we need to ultimately understand if they're actually in the way of my path to success or they're additive to. Is there something that I can learn? Is there something that I can gain? Is there something that will benefit me? So that's kind of, I've kind of gone really outwardly meta on that.
I like that. Zoom out to zoom in.
Yeah, and then kind of like really getting really practical. I guess success is really on a micro day-to-day level, feeling good, doing good, and making practical progress towards the version of yourself that you want to be, the authentic, truthful version of yourself, and doing things that equate to that, being around people that equate to that, and practicing self-care as well. I think success really lies in the Venn diagram, of like, performance. That's like what we really associate with success, right? Always doing, always going, but also well-being, which sometimes gets forgotten. And then I do think there's a third thing as well, which is doing good or being a custodian to humanity, Earth, etc. And I think that's important. And scientifically, we know actually it's good for us and we feel good, etc. So I think it's those three things. Like, what am I doing? Then what did I even say? Yeah, what am I doing? How am I helping? And then, is it sustainable? So yeah, that would be my recipe for success.
What if what you're doing externally and you're trying to achieve isn't working out? What if you're putting in that effort every day and it just, something doesn't feel right, or maybe it does, but you're not seeing the measures of success that you want to see?
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the word that you said, measures of success, I think we need to start having really realistic conversations with ourselves about what our measures of success are, and if they're realistic, if they're harmful, if they're actually correlated to the outcome we're trying to get itself, or again correlated to stories of what we think the outcome are. And so a recent example for me to bring it to life is, I can definitely get into a place of busyness where I'm constantly doing and heading towards all of my goals, but at times that leads me to being quite tired and exhausted, etc. And actually there's a bit of a lag between the action, the activity, and then the end goal, right? So invariably, if I'm always heading towards something, there's always going to be a lag. If I overexert myself, I'm always going to be exhausted. And if my focus is on actually trying to get that thing, there's always going to be a gap between that thing and where I'm at right now. And if the focus is that gap, if the focus is on that gap, and that's on my measure of success, that distance widening, that can actually be, I think, sometimes destructive. I think what a better measure of success can be sometimes is a learning goal. So, or a habitual or behavioral goal. And kind of going back to that Venn diagram of those three things that I was talking about before. So the doing good, the performance, and also the well-being. In a way, if we have this North Star, this life that I want to live, then there should in effect be a way in which I'm living at a daily level that equates to that. And if I'm living that life, then I am already there in a way. And so again, to your point of that frustration, etc., I guess that was a long-winded way of saying we have to reframe what success looks like sometimes in order to not feel frustrated. Sometimes we have to pivot. Sometimes if things aren't working, we need to recognize at what point is this now me exerting too much of my personal energy, and now, again going to that well-being aspect, now the negative impact that this is having on my well-being is now outside of my boundaries, and I can no longer take this path towards this.
Sometimes there's a line we cross where we're putting in so much energy to something to get something out of it, and then we start putting in all that energy and we put in too much, and it's actually just taking energy from us and not giving us anything back. In other words, we're not putting in the right energy to the right places. We're overworking, we're overstretching, we're overexerting, we're being too type A maybe. And then we're just stuck feeling deflated and defeated. And then if we don't have little measurements, it's just like we just feel even more deflated. How do you know when you've crossed that line? If that's a line you've crossed at some point, from working really hard to quote unquote working too hard, how do you know? Because I've had a lot of points in my life where I've gone like, don't tell me to work less, don't judge me this, because no one's building my life for me. And people don't want to hear, well, put in less effort.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a really good question. I have really... The brain can hold multiple views that can conflict with each other. And I do hold multiple views on this that conflict with each other and I'll just explain them, and then perhaps I'll just see what comes up. So there's one side of things where I think of anyone who's ever achieved anything ever. And invariably we're going to think of the greats, people that have achieved things in the public domain, because that's what we all have access to. When you look at their story, when you look at them discuss, it's very rare that their story is littered with, it was so easy, I never struggled, I never suffered, I never overextended, I was never tired. And so being realistic, you will be tired sometimes. Sometimes you will feel like, I don't want to do this. But that in and of itself is not, I don't think, a reason to stop something. I think where it then tips into, I guess, something that's unhealthy is where it becomes chronic patterns of overwhelm, energetic exhaustion that are a problem with your health. Like your mental health is actually in decline. But fatigue in and of itself, I think, I don't know, I can't help but assume that there's a strong correlation with this idea of achieving more than you've done before, because to do something that you haven't done before is always going to be to exert an unknown amount of energy, because you don't know what you're going to have to do to get there.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, you can't plan. You can do as much time blocking as you want, but you can't plan
honestly,
exactly how much it's going to take.
Yeah, 100%. And this is kind of like what I'm experiencing all the time, because I have so many different pockets of stuff that I'm doing that excites me. And I just can't plan it all because I've just never done it before. And you can have a best guess where you are basically trying to do as much information gathering as possible. And so what I mean by that is, okay, do you know someone that has done it before? Again, it won't be the same conditions that you have faced yourself, but are there books? There's always a book around this topic or something, but you can do as much of that as possible. But because these are new conditions, you're a different person, the circumstances are different, the way that you might handle situations is different. There's so much novelty. So I think you've got to leave room for experimentation. And experimentation is a big part of the way that I like to work and work with people. And even in my analytics world as well, experimentation is really big, test and learn. And invariably, the big part of experimentation is that you have a learning outcome and there's going to be an opportunity cost. Now, in the case of my marketing world, that opportunity cost is normally marketing and investment. But in the case of being a human, that opportunity cost can be many things, but a lot of the time it's your energy. You're going to need to exert an abundant form of energy to understand if you can learn what you need to learn. And I guess to your question, the thing here is just really understanding what's that tipping point where actually you've exerted too much. And again, to reiterate, it's if it looks like chronic impact on your like mental and physical well-being, I'd say that's probably a sign to be careful.
To listen to what your body is telling you, because at the end of the day, if you burn out, if you are the thing you're doing, right? For a lot of my audience at the moment is entrepreneurs or people who are leading their own project or their own thing. But actually, as this show starts to expand out to a more general personal development world, with the understanding or the goal that we are all our own self-leader, our own inner leader, that we just need to bring out more of. Well, then not only would something like our business break down if we had a breakdown, but actually our whole lives, and so therefore everything we lead, and then everything that is our purpose all breaks down. So it's even more. So you need. There's no point in making yourself so unhealthy, pushing yourself so far that you just collapse, because then everything you want that you've been sacrificing for gets sacrificed as well, and then it was just all pointless.
Well, literally. But then with that dose of reality that it might happen because you haven't done it before, so you might burn out.
Or you might just not know. I think it's really important to listen to ourselves. Our body often sends us little signals, but I think you make a really good point that we might not realize what that signal is, or that it sent us one.
Exactly.
If someone speaks to me in Spanish, I might not know how to listen to it.
Especially if we haven't developed that relationship with our body. Like, for example, I practice mindfulness. It's a journey. Also just like movement. Yoga's really good, etc. for developing and like, let's say proper yoga, but I mean the yoga where it's not necessarily about the physicality of exercising, it's about that relationship with your body and that mind-body connection. And so I do all of this stuff and I still have no idea what my body's saying to me. So if you've got a voice that is your purpose, right, that is, oh my god, you need to do this thing, like that's amazing. And then you also have this other voice, which is your body, which is like, please slow down. Both of those voices are actually the right voice, right? It's just that actually the quantities of how much we need to listen to them need to change. So it's not even always sometimes that there's a negative force there, because that voice is a positive force. Like one thing that I really love positive psychology, and I love strengths-based theory, basically. And in like strengths-based theory, it just talks about, instead of thinking of lack narratives and the disease model of the world where there's problems to solve, it talks about strengths. There's things that are good of us, that are positive, that are amazing,
that we can leverage more of.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
okay.
But within that subset, there's character strengths. And that's had the most study of it scientifically of any strengths-based area. Essentially, there's like the VIA survey, the value in action. If you go online, there's so many. You can take the survey, like it's free to take, and find out what your top character strengths are. There's like 24. I'm not affiliated as well. It's a free survey. But the power of that, because there's so much research. The reason I'm bringing it up is because they talk about the golden mean, where your strength is the best expression that it can have. And so to bring that to life a bit, curiosity is one of my top character strengths, which is great because I'm a coach, I get to do it. But excess of curiosity is invasiveness, intrusiveness, being nosy.
Oh,
right?
okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, and then a lack of it is indifference, like not caring, being nonchalant. And so there really is a golden mean of that expression, and it's context specific. When I'm being a coach, actually me asking loads of questions, it's not being intrusive because that's the context specific. You expect me to do that. When I'm at work and we're just having lunch and we don't have a close relationship, that's intrusive. If I'm asking you, what's your dream? When are you going to live your purpose? So I think it's really important to understand that things aren't black and white, things sit on a spectrum. So again, to that example of actually I have a dream, I have a purpose, that voice is really important, but it has a spectrum, a golden mean, where it's really helpful to actually now it's forcing a bit of over exertion.
One of the things that I think is really powerful for figuring out what we should do next, if we're ever lost and searching for the answer of what to do next, in any sphere of life, is to take a look at some inspiration or someone who's kind of been there, done that, or role model of some kind, and almost reverse engineer what's worked for them. So with this as an example, let's say you see someone who's really successful in whatever like realm or sphere of whatever. Do you think that their success has come largely from talent that they have, from the effort that they put in and how they put it in, from luck and what is luck even? And the reason I ask is because if you're looking to a role model to reverse engineer, that helps you understand what you need to work on.
Absolutely.
So what do you think? Where do you think the balance is?
I've got loads of opinions on this, and it goes back to how I feel and think about strengths. I think about them scientifically. And so in the strengths view of the world, that person, that leader, that role model has a subset of strengths, characteristics, attributes that they've used in their respective field that has supported them. That's with what they're in control of, right? Then you have, I do think there's context specific. I don't necessarily want to call it luck. I more want to call it extrinsic factors, external factors, things that you're not in control of. Such as being offered opportunities, particular relationships, different identity-based attributes that might offer privileges versus another group or identity. And you don't have control over that. And so I think talent's a part of it, but like if we look at the Gallup definition of strengths, it talks about talents are really important, and it talks about them being naturally occurring patterns of thought that have happened for a long amount of time. But it's not just talent in and of itself doesn't lead to strengths and success. It's actually the repetition and the action and the behavior and the habitual use of it that leads to the ability of you to be able to perform and execute effectively. And so with that in mind, I do think it's about the person. I do think it's about the strengths. I do think it's about external factors, or luck, if you want to call it. There's also a spiritual element of me as well that does believe in the power of like creating the world that we want to create. I think we have a role in creating the world. So that's notwithstanding systemic things that actually act as like actual barriers. It's more to say, if there is a situation that unfolds, I can focus on the actions that I can take, and so, or I can focus on everything that's gone wrong so far. The person that focuses on the actions that they can take is always going to be in action. And so they're going to keep going to places, etc. So I also think there's a viewpoint of the world that leads to more activity than not. And when you hear about successful people and role models, they tend to fall into that category where actually even when things are going wrong, they often cite they still feel scared, but they acted anyway. And so kind of drawing back, and I don't think you asked this explicitly, but I think there's something in, if it was me and I had a role model, should I then kind of, like, how do I then take that information and make it something that's personal to me? I think without identifying the habits that they are doing, some of the context specific things that have led them to be where they are, and the strengths that they actually possess, so you can distill what is it about them that made that happen, what it is about how they applied their talents, what it is about how external factors supported them, and what is about their habits, their actions, their day-to-day activities. At the point that is similar to you, then it's going to be very difficult for you to apply it, because people look at people sometimes and they're looking at what they're doing right now, and they're like, oh, if I start behaving like that, then it's going to happen. It's like, but that's what they're doing right now. The actions that they were doing when they were in your position, quote unquote, similar to you, will look different. And so, yeah, I think I can be a very scattered communicator. So I think I've...
Hey everyone, I wanted to take one quick sec to talk about a new partner that I am so excited to announce I have on the show, an agency called Untapped. Untapped exists to put your brand in the world's pocket with beautifully crafted, high-impact mobile experiences. They've worked with brands like Barclays, EA Sports, American Express, and even the UK government. They're known for creating powerful apps with intuitive, seamless interactions that drive customer engagement and elevate brand recognition. But it isn't just tech development. Their expertise is bridging phenomenal quality technology with beautiful design to create the highest quality product possible that takes your users on a real journey with you. You may remember Will, the founder of Untapped, from episode 13 of the podcast. If you haven't heard that chat, I highly recommend it, because it shows you what kind of no-nonsense, sleeves-rolled-up kind of people he and the team he's built really are, and it reflects in the kind of work that they do. They want to make their clients' work recognized across their industries and drive real game-changing value, something I've personally experienced and appreciated working with them myself. For businesses who want to take this next step in their journey, Untapped can help with everything from tech creation to brand design to product marketing and so much more. All right, the links are down below. Check it out. And now back to the episode. And I'm glad you've added in that caveat about essentially what you're speaking to there is comparison mindset. Right? Yeah. Something so prevalent amongst basically anyone under the age of 40. Human beings are prone to compare to others, because when we lived in a village of 150 people, we would need to compare ourselves to whoever was being most successful at whatever, because that would help us evolve or survive or whatever. Now it's, oh, they have a better thing than me, and it gets really unhealthy really fast. And actually the only person worth comparing yourself to is yourself in 10 years' time. Ever similar kind of vibe. And so to understand, well, in this person's context, these are the things that worked for them. In other words, taking what sounds like a really logical breakdown, having a really logical breakdown, and therefore not trying to emulate the whole of their lives or expect the same doors to just be like open for you if you do X, Y, and Z, because sometimes it might be harder for some people. Society might not be that nice or whatever. What do you think of this saying that luck equals opportunity plus preparedness?
Okay.
I don't know if plus is actually the right thing in there. It's essentially the equation that luck is opportunity meets preparedness. So the example that I love I don't remember the person's name or position, unfortunately. It's a great little video that describes someone very high up there at one of the big 5 tech companies. I think at Microsoft, working on really big projects, really high up there, really well paid. And he comes from a really tiny village in China where he didn't get a great education or anything like that. And he was asked once, do you consider yourself lucky to have gone from that position to where you are now here at Microsoft and doing all these things? And he goes, luck is like showing up for the bus every day, not knowing if you're going to be able to get on.
Yeah.
And that's what it is you have your preparedness and then you just show up.
Yeah.
And you just keep showing up. And eventually the opportunity will be there and you'll be prepared to actually grab it.
Yeah.
And that is luck. That's the part of luck no one sees.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I definitely think there's truth in and power in the notion of always being prepared to take opportunities that come your way. So yeah, I think that analogy is really, really powerful. A couple of things though that come up for me. I've worked in numbers like my whole working career, so I think we need to be careful when we look at what the top 1% of people and then apply that to an average. Like, things are distributed normally for a reason, in the sense that actually, like, if you just copy those behaviors, it doesn't necessarily mean that it happened to you. In that analogy, I guess, in terms of luck, is showing up for the bus every day, not knowing if the bus is going to come, and then one day the bus might come. That's incredibly powerful and understandable, that if you were one of maybe 10 people queuing up for the bus and you did that every day, and maybe the bus showed up once and the bus can carry 10 people, you did it. But then when you have 1 million people queuing for that bus, I don't know, I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I just think we have to be careful when we use one person's story and see it as a monolithic experience that everyone can have access to.
I think there's something in that. What this like equation, this really rough equation that I explained, doesn't outline is that for some people you could. The opportunities to be prepared for come more frequently.
Yeah.
And that's a societal challenge. That's something to work on. That's what equity is all about, right?
Yeah.
I've worked with underrepresented founders a chunk of my career. And what I do think is important to highlight, and why I think the personal development part of this equation is so important, is what a lot of them would say to me is like, look, we know that there are challenges. They're X less likely to get funded. They're it takes them X amount of more time to reach levels of success, etc. Yes, I want these things to improve, but I'm not building my business in 10 years when they've improved. I'm building it now. It's going to be more challenging for me, but like, I just need to deal with it. And so there's the personal empowerment angle, I think, is a really important part of like this narrative.
Yeah, I think so too. I think for me, like, I've spent time coaching people predominantly from underserved backgrounds, and there's, in that opportunity of, in that analogy of the bus, I think one of the biggest opportunities I see is the mental opportunity to think of yourself differently. And that's what I see as something being so enabling for people from underserved communities. In that example that you gave there, where it's like, oh, I'm less likely to receive funding, etc. All of those things are factual, but I think there's a difference between observing a fact in the world and knowing it can be different for you, and acting on that idea of, oh, but I'm going to act in this way and I know it's possible for me, which I think is really healthy, and that's where we want it to be. But sometimes what can happen is we can identify with the narrative, and I think that's where it becomes, when we mentally identify with the narrative, it's not that it's not factual, but if you now believe that this is the story and your story and how your story is going to act out, it's going to be really difficult for you then to be prepared for those opportunities that come. So I do think a lot of the work that I actually end up doing when I'm working with people is working around thoughts that are supportive to them in general.
Yes.
Working on self-concept. Again, I always harp on about strengths, but just the best self-portrait and an understanding, like even a simple question. Up until now, if you had to put in a few sentences, what's the story of you? Just a couple sentences. And so often what you might hear is people talk about the things they've done, the things they haven't done. A lot of the time things that haven't happened to them, because when we think of stories, they're these big things of like, oh, I kind of did these achievements, but actually it might be, if we're thinking of something that's a bit more holistic, it might be, I'm super courageous, I'm someone who takes chances, I'm a fighter, I'm someone who cares deeply, passionately about others. Our self-concept and our story of self will impact our results and how we then act in the world.
Yes.
And so if we don't have a positive story of self, and we're not aware that we don't have a positive story of self, and then we start seeing results that don't add up to what we're trying to do, it might be because at somewhere your level of thought is that you don't think that you can do this.
Yes.
And it might be because it's observably in the world you're seeing, but that doesn't happen for people like me. So yeah.
If you set a really unrealistic expectation, whether it's too negative, I don't love the word negative or positive, but too negative or positive for the sake of argument of an expectation, too low a bar or too high a bar, and you identify with being at the level of that bar, you are doomed for some kind of challenge that you have created through narrative. So I think that's really, really powerful. I'm really glad you bring this up, because I talked a lot on this show so far about like what is a model we can use to reverse engineer for X that we need to do. And I do think that's really interesting, but it brings up a really good point of, do you really want to model yourself on this person, expecting yourself to do exactly what you've done, what they've done, and get the same result? There's a story I love about this. I say story, it's more of an example than a story. Olympic swimmers. I have, if someone were to look at an Olympic swimmer and go, I want my body to look like theirs does, right? The muscles, the body shape, whatever, right? That's my ideal health profile. They go, well, they're an Olympic swimmer, so I'm just going to do a lot of swimming. And it doesn't work. Because what swimmers have done is they've not done lots of swimming, which has given them that body. They've gone, to be the best swimmer I can be, I need to do X, Y, and Z to get good at swimming. So that might mean certain exercises or routines in the gym that build certain muscles. It might be breath work, because you have to hold your breath for ages as a swimmer, whatever. And so they've done other things that have made them good at swimming, and those other things have also given them that body as a byproduct that just so happens to give them the result they want. From afar, reverse engineering, you think that's what you're doing, but you're not. You're just copying, and you're missing what's actually going to get you there.
I completely agree. I don't actually think it's possible to reverse engineer
anything.
I don't think so. I think business models of really specific examples, applying it to different markets, because you see people do that time and time again. But in terms of human-based reverse engineering a person's success, in like a really like, I'm going to do the exact same thing kind of way. No, I don't actually believe in that.
That's really interesting.
I don't think it's possible, because there's just a different context. There's behaviors, habits, of course. So I can find out what habits Obama has, for example, and I can copy those habits. But he has completely different attributes, strengths, qualities. That means that even when he does those habits, they express in different ways. So, for example, even if I was to copy the way in which that he does everything, it would be entirely different the way that I do it. And so I guess to your point, I think it's important to learn and to, I guess, take positive lessons from people who are doing great things. Of course, like it'd be wild not to. That information's out there. There's lots of information on how people did things, etc. But unless we're recontextualizing based on our specific sets of skills, strengths, attributes, context, systems that we're in, identities, I just really struggle to understand how someone would lift and shift someone else's life and apply it to their own. I can't fathom it. Genuinely.
I think this is so interesting to me, and I love that we've gotten to this place. So there's one thing to wrap up this line of thought that you mentioned, which is the self-portrait.
Yeah.
So if you had to help me design a self-portrait
Yes.
to use to achieve some of the things you've talked about, what would we do? What would you take me through?
Oh my gosh, I love this. So I guess the first thing would be just to have a conversation around understanding what energizes you, who energizes you, what environments energize you. And that would be to build up a profile of when you're at your best. Then we'd kind of more go explicitly of when you're at your best. Because the idea, sometimes when you ask someone that straight away, when's you at your best? That's a lot. But actually, if you identify, okay, what things you enjoy, what environments you enjoy, what are you doing when you're doing that? Okay, like then questions like, what would you say that there's things that maybe you're in the top 20% of that you do? And you might be like, oh, I'm really good at writing, like for example. Then we just start to build up that profile of that. Then what we might do is go through some actually more specific questionnaire type training just to identify some of those strengths. I mentioned the VIA survey, there's Strengths Finder, etc. There's different like assessments that have been scientifically built to understand strengths in different ways. I might then have a conversation around, okay, that's so clinical. These are some stories. How about you bring it to life a bit? Go out into the world, keep a diary of you using them. Spot yourself using these strengths, look at it, identify it. Also go back in time and start creating a timeline and a story of when you were doing all these positive things. And all of this is to feed into this idea of creating a positive version of self and building up that positive self-concept, when really getting you to tap into, oh, I did do that. Oh, but actually, I'm happiest when I'm with that person. The reason that is because I feel safe, and when I feel safe, I'm able to communicate. And I actually am a good communicator. It's just I don't communicate well when I'm in these environments. So just building up that positive story of self. Another thing that would be really beneficial to do, because sometimes we have blind spots, we have biases, is sometimes doing a personal 360. So texting 5 to 10 of your friends and then being like, hey, I've done this. I've made a course where I actually do this, where I just get people just to text 10 of their friends, be like, hey, would you be able to tell me a strength of mine and give me an example of when you've seen me using it? And
I love that.
the
So
example's
practical.
really, the example's really important as well, because it's not just like, oh yeah, you're really funny. It's like, oh yeah, and if you'd be surprised, I've heard people come back and say the richness that they receive just from that exercise alone is like, oh my God. And it also covers blind spots, because some people, like the funny example, some people don't even realize they're funny. And they have blind spots based on who they think their self-concept, right? And so the reason of doing that 360, and again, the big part of that is you have to choose people you trust. Like, if there's a hater, don't send it to them. But choose people you trust, and go have some breadth as well. Some people from work, some people from communities you're part of, friends and family, etc. Go vast as you can. But that's in addition. And so the first part's, the pattern there is that's all your own stuff, your thoughts. And I think it's important to get that first. Then you add in this layer of, oh, okay, then what do others think that are close to me? And then you just got a whole lot of information. And then I'd say sit with that for a bit and then start to distill it. And then I'd say let's go for an exercise where we say we take that information and let's write a story of you based on that information. So it's not like when we first said it, it might have been like, oh yeah, like I was like 10 and then I kind of did like football, and then I've never played football, so I don't even know, I use that as an example. But it's like that. But now we have all these examples of, okay, for me, it might be like I'm a super curious communicator who loves to really get underneath the surface of issues and what people are going through to help them solve problems. That's one thing I love doing. Or I'm a storyteller that loves communicating through different mediums to tell the truth. That's a really lovely story to tell yourself. And actually, if I have some of these stories that are just sentences, I can start to live that out. And then to cut this short, then we get into the work of, okay, now what's possible? But we have to do that work first to understand what you're positive, to get to the point where you have a positive self-concept, a positive story of self. And then from that place, once you're opened up, what's possible, and then we do the work to make that possible reality.
I love this because that moves us really practically from the unknown into a space of possibility.
Yes.
And when there is possibility, you have the freedom, the ownership, the self-ownership to decide what to do with it. No one else can tell
100%.
you that this thing you've just created and gone and done isn't right, because people literally told you that it was.
This literally, and also, but also you told yourself, you remembered that time where, like, I remember doing this exercise, and I literally remember, it's the most random story of me getting like perfect marks on my history coursework. And the reason that was really important is because I had been telling myself a story that, oh, I can't really write anymore. Like, I just can't really write. I don't think I've ever been able to write, actually, like, etc. Then just remembering that, and remembering the research that I did to do that, and what I had done to get to that place, it just reminded me of, like, well, if that was possible then, like, I'm not a different person. In fact, I have more knowledge, I have more information. Like, I was actually like 17 then. So it reminded me of my efficacy in that area, and it made me think, okay, what are the kind of things that I did? Oh, I did loads of research. Oh, it's more that I'm not doing enough research before I'm writing things, because I love research. And so it makes you think of what then creates that successful self, going back to the word of success, but my version of it. Because again, if you keep on trying to emulate, which you can do, okay, what do writers do? Okay, I do these things, but actually, when I go back and look at my previous processes, that tells me how I achieved the thing, rather than trying to copy someone else and then reaching walls and then telling yourself a story. I can't do that. So that's why, again, I think it's really important to constantly recontextualize your own skills, strengths, and positive self-concept.
I love it. What I like to do on this show is to really understand who we're speaking to.
Yes.
The how that you became the person you are now. Your story.
Oh my God, I feel like I should have been prepared for this because I'm talking about stories. My story, I'm actually going to pause so I can actually tell it properly. My story is one of a constant state of self-discovery and curiosity. I have this unending curiosity that wants to find out more about the world and how to be truthful in it. And it just so happens that one of those things in that world is me. And then so that curiosity turns inwardly as well. And so in doing that, in finding out more about that, it means that I'm constantly trying to find out more about other people, find out more about my environments, and find out more about me. And that creates this sense of, I guess, wanting to connect and empathize with others, with a viewpoint to understand how we can do things together. Because it's this curiosity of like, okay, well, if I'm like this and you're like this, what would be possible if we were to come together and do Y, for example? That's incredibly meta. Let me get a bit more literal. I'm also somewhat, I don't know. I think my story is one of a trier. I'm someone who, I just won't stop. I'm quite relentless, and I don't like the idea of not ever being able to follow my deepest passions and ideal dreams and aspirations. But I'm also incredibly logical, and I've worked in numbers, so I have these two opposing forces in me, that is heart and creativity, and then logic. And then so my story is kind of bringing those two worlds together in the only way that I know how. And so the way that breathes life in me right now, that looks like me working in analytics whilst also being a coach, while also being a poet performer. My story is identity, and I guess getting closer to my own identity and sense of self. I only became a coach in 2020, and that was not just during the pandemic, as it was, but it was also the year that it was the murder of George Floyd. And I had this kind of like awakening where I felt called to do something more than me, and not in some really altruistic way. It didn't feel like that over time at all, and it still doesn't. Just more that it has to be more than just me going to work and me coming back and me trying to get more money. It has to be. And with that happening, it's like, it is, because then I just started becoming part of lots of different communities that were all just trying to do that. They were trying to make this world a more equitable place. And again, that unending curiosity just made me more curious to find out more about those people, what they're doing, the work they're doing. Then whilst doing coaching, understanding that actually all the work is just holding up a mirror to someone and showing them the parts of themselves that are capable, worthy, amazing, powerful, and letting them understand that they can trust that reflection and use that reflection to become and do what they want to do. And so I guess my story is also one of kind of understanding that myself and kind of finding my own mirror through having coaches, through interacting with people, and kind of, well, creating my own best self-portrait and really understanding what's possible for me. And I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't have this sense that, oh, I've achieved an awful lot. Like, I don't at all. There's definitely so much things I want to do. But I do have this sense that I'm creating a life that is meaningful to me, where I'm crafting at a daily level all actions that I'm doing build up to that life in the future that I want. But now I'm really against is very strong, but I find it really difficult to buy into a notion of, I want to create a life that's really peaceful, where I have lots of acceptance and love, and I'm going to do that through a lack of self-love, a lack of peace, and a lack of connection now. That doesn't make sense to me. And so I guess my story, again, is one of, how do you create the dream today in your daily actions? That means that it's going to happen, but it means that you can also appreciate and be grateful now.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here really quickly with an offer for you. Those of you who are a little newer to my work, which is most of you looking at the show's stats, will probably not know that for much of my career, I've been working with people to take more ownership of their lives as a coach, mentor, guide, and educator. This show exists to help people discover and cultivate their greatest inner leader. And that stems from a personal mission of mine. But what does it actually mean? Well, I break this down into 3 things: calm, confidence, and courage. We could all do with a little bit more, at least a little bit more, of all 3 of those things in our lives. But how do we make it happen? Well, that depends on us, on our temperament and our context, and so much more. So I've developed a free tool to help us understand 3 of the biggest things that I've noticed hold us back from those really powerful states to be in: restlessness, reactivity, and resistance. What I help folks do is move from that place into that place of calm, courage, and confidence instead. So you can use the link below to check that out. It's totally free, super simple, quick, and easy to use, so that you can get just a little bit of clarity in that regard. And I created it just for this show because I noticed how important it was to overcome exactly those challenges. That's what the show is trying to help you do after all, so why not make it easy for you? So with all that being said, I really appreciate you. Hope you find that useful, and let's get back into this episode. The only thing that exists is the now. To assume that you're giving up all of the now, not making some sacrifices because you have a lot of work to do to achieve those goals, but if the entirety of the now is being sacrificed for the sake of a future vision that doesn't actually exist, you're living in a fantasy world, hoping that you'll live long enough to get there, and pretending the now doesn't exist. The now becomes about the vision. And this is something I've learned the hard way, that if whatever you're working on, you have a vision, you have the now, you have the work you need to do now, and the only thing you're in love with is the vision. You don't like anything you're doing now. None of your life looks right. It's not that you're making some sacrifices. It's not that you're putting in some extra work. It's that the entirety of right now,
Yeah.
all the tasks, the amount of time, everything is all not what you want and feels like crap, but it's just pure, like, sheer willpower and motivation for the long-term vision.
Yeah.
You're not in love with the vision, you're in love with the delusion.
Yes.
Because a vision alone is just an imaginary point in the future, and the future doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is the now.
Yes.
So it's really powerful to acknowledge that, yes, I might have a lot to do now, and not every day is going to look perfect, whatever. But if all that exists is now, now needs to be as beautiful as it can be.
Absolutely. And I think it's about appreciating that as well, but in a really practical, intentional, and habitual way.
So how are you doing that? What does that look like for you?
I think it looks like in reality just setting time aside to reflect on what has actually happened in the last month. What does that mean? What am I accepting and appreciating about myself that I've done? Taking ownership of it. I think that's really important. I think sometimes, a lot of times I see with people I'm working, just a real difficulty around being able to just acknowledge like, oh, I did that and that's good and that's okay. And I really appreciate myself from that. So I think self-appreciation is super important. I think as well, savoring. So it's a very positive psychology term, but it's about when you are experiencing those positive emotions, thinking of how you can savor those moments, how you can, okay, I've just got to this milestone, I'm feeling good. How can I take time to lengthen that savoring of that moment?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
so actually, and especially if you do make it about the journey and like learning goals as opposed to outcome goals, I think it's really good to have a healthy amount of learning goals, because you will always invariably be learning something, either about yourself, someone else, what you're doing. But then if you can savor that and have a gratitude practice, share it with someone, have an accountability group, do something nice for yourself, buy yourself a gift. I don't know, have a totem that you have. I think physical totems are really good.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You mean like representations of things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or are you going as far as like having your own little altar at home to things?
You can have
or...
your own little altar. Like, I'm not gonna lie.
I have my own, so I'm not judging at all.
I do. I like, for example, like for one of my birthdays, I had a dream that I would, because I love performing and I hadn't performed in ages, that I would do a show for my birthday. So I was going to invite all my friends and I was going to sing for them, and that would be my birthday. And I made it happen. Okay. So I had a band, I had other friends sing with me, and the band was like piano, guitars, drums, right? Wow. So it was like, it was a basic band. It wasn't like some crazy orchestra. But I had two other of my really best friends sing with me as well. And we had a 14-song set. I had some solos, we had duets, we had like all three of us singing together. And that's a dream that I had on the previous birthday. I was like, I'd really love to make that happen. And then it happened. And then literally like my friends were there for this birthday and they were screaming at me. I honestly felt like Beyonce. Like literally I was like, oh my God. It was wild. But that for me wasn't just, oh, I had this super indulgent birthday where I got all of my friends to say they love me, because that's amazing. And it is. It's more, I had this idea and I actually made it real. And it was something that I really wanted to happen, and also something that I don't hear a lot of people doing. And the only reason I say it's important is not for the comparative nature, it's more that was my authentic want, not one that's been given to me, not a story of this is what success looks like, this is what fun looks like, this is what something looks like. And I was able to make that happen. So I actually have a picture of myself from that birthday just to remind me of that nature of what are your authentic needs and wants. You can create them. How are you creating them? So that's one way. Also, I had an amazing relationship with my grandma. Like, she was like amazing, like one of my best friends ever. And one time she just said this, I was moaning about like my life, like, oh my God, look at all these things to think about. And she just turned around to me one time and said, where's your joie de vivre? And I don't know, in that moment, just being asked that question, it's really a question of like asking you to understand what brings you joy and how are you actively looking for that. And that was a really powerful moment in my life. And my grandma was the physical totem of that. Every time I saw that reminder of her, she unfortunately passed away. To commemorate her, I had a ring made that I'm wearing now, and it's got engraved on it, "Where's your joie de vivre?" So that not only reminds me of my relationship with her, which I'd say she's probably my first coach, because like she backed me to no end, but also just that sentiment, and I wear it every day. "Where's your joie de vivre?" I find myself just tapping my ring sometimes, not even thinking about it.
It's become an unconscious link. It's become an unconscious...
Exactly, like a behavioral thing. And then
Yes.
it's great. I can feel my mind unidentifying with whatever thought I'm identifying with of closed doors to like, remember you have autonomy. What's going to bring you joy? And then so those are just two examples of bringing that to life. Also, there's things like it's within appreciative inquiry. They say naming things can be really good as well. So even just having, this is going to be the year of X, and just having that as a name and something you return to can be really good in affirming, like, this is going to be the year of self-love. It sounds cringy, but that can be a really affirming way to remind yourself of a message. That's something that you want to bring back around. Vision boards, all sorts. But I think taking it from here into the physical space that you occupy, and better yet, into rings or things that you can carry with you, pictures in wallets or purses or whatever. There's, as you said at the start of the conversation, there's so many distractions and so many different messages coming to us at any point in time. So in all of that, whatever we can do to amplify and multiply the messages of our authentic voice, needs and wants, of our best self, that's really powerful.
How did you get to this place where this is the perspective that you've adopted? Like, at what point in your life did this happen? Because I can imagine you haven't always been like this.
No.
Because none of us have.
No,
right? We're all born narcissists and see things a certain way, and we learn to see things more powerfully. So how did that happen for you?
I think realistically, I've had an experience of low self-esteem and anxiety that has coloured and peppered so many parts of my life. And it just gets to a point where you're like, I just can't feel like this anymore. And you're at a crossroads. You're like, I either can't feel like this anymore and I'm going to do nothing about it, and I accept that, well, this is real. But I was lucky enough, like with my grandma, my friends, family, communities, to have enough of a voice that said, but I do think, and I'm a bit of a dreamer, I do think it can be different. And because, I'm not gonna lie, it was a move towards, but it was also a move away from. It was like, I can never feel that again. Now, I don't necessarily feel like that now, because I recognize even that thought in and of itself is unhealthy. But because we're talking about how I got here, that was such a powerful part of it. It was like, I never want to feel so unworthy and anxious all the time. And taking the autonomy part of it, what is it that I am doing in my life that is contributing to this experience? And so for me, for example, I meditate. Mindfulness is super important. I exercise regularly. I never used to exercise regularly. I never used to meditate. I don't drink. It's really important to me to not drink, because I used to, but more, that was just something that made me feel anxious. So it's more just a recognition of, and to your point around the sacrifices, what are the things that are contributing to it, and and I said this word, boundaries. What are my boundaries? Because like for some people, it might just be like, I'll just do a little bit less. I don't have to stop anything, for example. So it's recognizing, for me, I was like, what is contributing to that? What thoughts, patterns that I had about myself, thinking, oh my God, how can I get over this? I did therapy as well, so that was like super powerful, and recognizing those thought patterns and being like, oh wow, is this what I'm thinking about myself? One exercise that I find really powerful, and I actually think I made this up, but I could be wrong. But no one told me to do this, basically. You know, like those clickers that bouncers have outside clubs?
Okay.
I found myself having like thinking patterns around like physical body insecurity.
Okay.
And I really wanted to understand how pervasive this was. So I said, okay, for a couple of days, I'm just going to get a clicker. And every time I notice a thought that is like about that topic, I'm going to click it. And so I did that for about 5 days. And it was wild how often it was. I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
But just in doing that exercise, I found myself able to catch myself.
How many times was it? Do you remember?
Oh my God. I think one day was like 93 times. Yeah.
Because you know this thing, we have like 60,000 thoughts.
Yeah,
a day,
yeah,
most are
yeah,
unconscious
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And so and we probably have way more than we realize. And
one
so that
was
even what
93
you do-
times. Like,
yeah.
And I was like,
Wow.
oh my gosh.
It just makes it so real, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Hearing the stat we have 60,000 unconscious thoughts a day
Yeah.
doesn't help
Doesn't
you
surprise
because it
me.
just sounds huge and you go.
Yeah.
But when you do this thing and you go, oh, it's very specific. It makes it so
literally,
real.
100%. It also is really powerful because then, and I think it's something that I do semi-regularly, less regularly now than when I first started, but it helps you then catch yourself more often. And then I noticed they started to dissipate because I would catch myself. So it's not that they go, or at least not for me. I know there's different things that say, oh, you do these things and they disappear. That's not what it was for me. It was that I started to notice them. And then it meant in a very like CBT way, I could interrupt the pattern then. I could say other messages that I wanted to say instead. I could pattern interrupt and actually just change my body language. I could be mindful and be like, oh God, I'm having this thought. What about if I just focus on the grounding on my feet for 30 seconds? What if I just get up? One thing I used to do is get up and get some water. Just get up and get some water. So I started drinking lots of water, which was really good for me. So yeah, being able to do that exercise, which I repeat now with different thoughts when I notice different patterns or different stories that I'm telling myself, was really beneficial because then, and doing it over a period of time as well, because it's not just recognizing the thought, it's recognized the different environments. I was able to see which days, so the days that I had the highest, I looked at my activities that I was doing during the day and I'd be like, oh, it's because I had this and this going on. And so even be able to identify, oh, these are the environments where I'm feeling most self-conscious. It means that, okay, going into them, I can begin to do the pre-work before going into them and be like, okay, let me gas myself up because I'm about to go into this big thing. And so, yeah, being able to have that ability to generate self-awareness, because I don't think it's easy to be self-aware. Like, it's really difficult. Like, we have so much coming on all the time that actually to be in a constant state of self-awareness, like that's like our brains are designed to be efficient with energy, and having a constant state of awareness that's unpracticed isn't energy efficient because actually it's not, because it's not in default. It's not in our system one. It's our human brain saying, okay, let's be focused. Let's not go into habit. Let's not go into old patterns. And so, yeah, it's just to say it takes a lot of energy and effort to be self-aware. So when we can do little tricks like this, where I gamified it, right, then that actually became a bit habitual because I just click it. It took the thinking out of it. It didn't mean like, oh, now I have to reflect. It was like, just click it, just click it, just click it.
Reflect later.
Yeah, reflect later.
This is really interesting. So if you had to distill into one sentence advice for your younger self, knowing what you know now, based on everything you just said,
Yeah.
what would you tell them?
I would say really double down on what it is that makes you special. Understand it, hone it, own it, and then sleep. Sleep and reflect.
Resting on it. So you have that, you do. Okay, that's really interesting actually, because we just really want answers to things, and actually our brain, again, 99% of it's unconscious. If you give your brain the command to think through something and then leave it, it will find answers for you because it's doing the processing in the background.
Literally.
So actually that's super practical. It's like, okay, I've thought about this more consciously, great, let me sleep on it.
Yeah,
and the brain will do its thing.
Yeah. And so if I had to just be really simple, just from what we just spoke about, and my brain's quite it's only going to connect to the last piece of information we just said, so it's really about that specific example. But I'd say that because I think, to the point of what we discussed, that it's that positive self-concept. So really being able to generate that for yourself and believe it, right? I don't know, from that, you can do anything from that place. When you truly understand your source and believe in it, and it's about returning to possibility. That's for me is the ticket, because if you really want to do something and you believe it's possible, I really believe in the power of humans and what we can do, like, so much. I really do think you will make it possible, but you just need to believe that it's possible and understand yourself enough to understand where there's things that you will be able to do with high effectiveness, there are things that you will struggle with, and how do you navigate those things you might struggle with effectively? Delegation, support, etc., tools, effort, focus if needed. But how do you sit in that pocket of strength? Because energetically, that's where you'll be able to get the most done. And how can you begin to view the world through that prism of strengths and view problems differently? So if my strength is curiosity and someone else's strength is humility, let's say, that's one of the character strengths. This is very value-based. But they're going to approach something differently to how I will with curiosity. They'll approach with humility, and both will be valid. But the theory of strengths is that it will be energetic. There'll be an energetic quality for me if I do it with curiosity, and for them, humility, and both will be valid. So really understanding what it is, your sources, I think is really, really important.
There's a lot today I wanted to cover that we haven't had time to cover. Time has flown by, so I have to wrap us up.
I'm such a waffler as well. So.
Actually, I think this has been great. I think you've given us a lot of really energetic detail. So we might have to come back for a part 2 at some point, because there's a lot of stuff around leadership we didn't get to talk about.
Yeah.
But there's something you mentioned earlier that I want to make sure we cover before we end off, which is about, the words you used were abundant energy. So I'm assuming by that you mean the energy of abundance.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? What is that?
Again, not to keep harping on about these strengths, but the idea of strengths is that it's not just something that you're good at, it's something that's also energizing for you. I know you spoke about this energetic quality of like stepping into this leadership space and that. And so I'm good at it, but also it fuels me. It makes me feel good when I'm doing it. So when I'm talking about abundance, it's really tapping into an energetic quality of where you're doing things that also feed you and make you feel good. It's like a multiplier. It's like, the 1 + 1 = 3. That will be the case for you and I for a range of things.
Okay.
And it's ensuring that we're spending enough time doing it in that range of things. Because sometimes we'll do the things that the 1 + 1 = 2 because we have to. But a lot of the time we might be doing the things where the 1 + 1 is equal to 1.5. And then we get frustrated because we're not moving forward. But that's because actually our 1 + 1 = 3 is over here. So we really need to understand what that is. And when we're in this 1.5 area, understand what we want to do about it, like before, delegate, tools, etc. But again, to your point in terms of that burnout, I find a lot of the times, I don't know if I find it, but I think some of the times what can happen is that we're in this 1 + 1 = 1.5 area and we don't know it. And actually, the same activities can be done in this 1 + 1 + 3, but we have to understand what those conditions need to be for us to have 1 + 1 = 3.
Oh, that's interesting. So we're not just talking about tasks, although it can be that. We're also talking about context,
absolutely,
situational, what needs to happen for the situation that I'm in to allow everything I'm doing to have a hidden multiplier that I never could have known. So what you're actually doing is the aim is to craft an environment where you're having a hidden multiplier as opposed to a hidden denominator.
100%. So it's like,
divisor.
the way that I like to talk about it is like, look, if we've got 16 awake hours in a day, 8 hours of sleep, we want to be spending those 16 hours in that 1 + 1 = 3. That's when we're going to be living our best lives, literally, because we're getting the most done and it feels great. It's just logical. So, but that might not always make sense, right? Because say you have a task to do that is not, say, that's in your 1.5, for example. But then if I get a bit curious about it and I say, let me bring it to life with an example that might actually be done this with 1.5 and 3. It's not really that. So it might be reading a book, let's say. And actually, for you and your learning style, you might get most of your information in an auditory way. And so all this time, you've been reading books and been really frustrated with yourself because you can't read and it's really difficult for you to extract information and it takes you ages to finish a book and you're frustrated, you can't finish it. There's the self-loathing because you're like, oh, why can't I finish books? Because that's what smart people do, right? All the successful people I know about read books. I need to read books.
Behind the guests on this podcast, there's a whole bunch of books.
Yeah,
do I need to read all these books?
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
But actually, what about audiobooks? Yeah. And
podcasts.
Actually, and podcasts.
Hey.
So just in that really simple example, it's like, how do I then make it work for me? And actually, if you're an auditory person, then you're like, oh, now I get through 5 books in a week because I listen to it on 1.5 speed, and I really love taking in information from listening that way. And then all this energy that I spent over here in this 1.5 reading books, and the self-loathing from not being able to do it, it's gone.
Yes.
And now I'm learning, which I love, and it's really energetic and it's really lovely, and I'm listening to stuff and it's really exciting. And so there's the plus of that, and then there's also all of that negative stuff that's gone away from that negative self-concept is also gone. So yeah, that's also where some of that free comes from, because it's also the removal of some of that stuff. So hopefully that's in a really specific example, but you can apply that to anything. It might be like, for example, using a values lens or a strengths lens, going to the gym. And actually, it's like, for some people, it's like, okay, I do whatever. I don't know what people do at the gym, but I do all the things people do at the gym. But for some people, it's like, oh, I'm going to go rock climbing, I'm going to swim, I'm going to do activities, because actually I need to be doing activities and having fun for activities and exercising that way than going to the gym. And so it sounds simple, but making it work for you. But it's just being in that 1 + 1 = 3. Is it energetic for you? Yeah, I'm waffling on now, so yeah.
I love this because one of the questions I was going to ask is how often you think we get in our own way and how to get out of our way. But I think we've answered that.
Yeah.
And it's like we're in our own way because we put ourselves into unhelpful environments or because of some comparison mindset while not listening to what we need, and actually just being unhelpful instead of helpful to ourselves, not listening instead of listening, or listening to the wrong voices instead of to the intuition.
Yeah.
And this creates a melting pot of either really fantastic situation that is a multiplier for your life, or a really challenging situation in which you've created the divisor for your own life. And your impact from there. So I think this is actually a really powerful formula when you put it all together. Not to turn it into too much of math. I'm not a math person. I don't know why I'm making it sound like a formula. But anyway, it's really practical, which I love. As a result of these experiences or realizations, what you think leadership is. What is it actually? What does it actually mean?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's very big. I mean, obviously, I must have thought about this question because I'm coming on here, but I want to think of a really personal example of leadership, personal leadership. I think, as you've probably got from our conversation, I really like things being practical and meta, but both of them together, both worlds. But when I think of personal leadership, it's a quality of being sustainable and effective at well-being, performance, and also meaning and purpose and accomplishment. It's those 3 things, going back to that Venn diagram of things. And so it's, how am I being supportive to myself, others, and my environments in a way that maximizes the likelihood of positive well-being, performance, and a sense of meaning. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
And do you think that can be applied to a context bigger than yourself?
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So kind of we take that in ourselves, but when we're thinking of the meaning and the performance and also the well-being, we start with ourselves, but then we apply that to others.
Okay.
And so actually then when I'm working with you on a one-to-one, it is, okay, thinking about those three lenses, is the way I'm working maximizing performance? Is it maximizing well-being?
Got
And
you.
actually, do people have a sense of meaning and purpose in their work? Is that something that, but again, it's like, is that something I need to take ownership of? Or
Yes.
is it something I need to facilitate?
We can apply that to ourselves. Do I feel meaning and purpose? Have I given that to myself? Do I feel these, etc.? And then when you're in a leadership position or you take on a responsibility of some kind, it therefore becomes your responsibility to also apply it to others.
Yeah, and encourage it. But I think the encouragement and the facilitation, the coaching of it is important, because I don't think my personal dogma should be put on someone else.
Okay.
So I think what's important is to encourage, and the reason I say those three things is because when you really get to the Venn diagram of that, it's really your authentic truth. If I have meaning and purpose, if I'm having positive emotions and positive experiences, and I'm performing and I'm growing, then I'm living a happy life. And so it's really trying to access that in others, like, what does meaningful movement in a positive direction mean for you? When are you feeling your best? Like, what do you get from work, and what does it do for you? It might be like money, okay, but what's underneath money is security. Okay, security is really important to that person. Well, let's have a conversation. What makes you feel most secure at work? Okay, job stability. Then I need to start thinking about, for that person, well, how does the parts of their job affect security? Oh, when there's stuff happening, how do I communicate with them in a way that still makes them feel secure, and why do things happen? So it's really just trying to understand that person, but through those three lenses, but also performance, right? Because when we're doing these activities, it's to get stuff done.
Yeah.
That's
It's all to get results, right? It's like,
results.
no matter how complicated you make it, at the end of the day, you're leading yourself or others to achieve a result of some kind.
Yeah, exactly.
So I suppose as long as it's in the service of the result, or maybe because it's in the service of the result, your duty is to do these things, combination of things.
Yeah, I think so. For me, it's more, and this is just because I'm just such an emotional type, it's more in service of the person, because they're there to do the result. So I don't think it isn't, because if you signed up to do a job, that's your job. So I'd rather support you, because you know you have autonomy. You have autonomy and freedom, competence. So you've actually signed up to do this. So I don't, in my mind, if I trust you, I don't need to do the result for you. I need to trust that you need to do the result. But then what I need to do is work out how to create the environment that maximizes the likelihood that you're going to be able to do that. Through those three different paradigms, through understanding what makes you perform the best, what makes you feel the best, and then also what gives you a sense of meaning and purpose.
Really powerful, really practical.
Yeah, it's always
Tashan,
practical.
this has been really cool. As we wrap up, I have a closing question I ask everyone who comes on the show.
Yeah.
This is more personal to you. This is not necessarily to do with anything we've talked about.
Okay.
This is one of these big, deep life questions, because the show is called Lost and Searching, and I really care about understanding our guests and the individuals. So that you are still searching for the answer to.
Oh, this is good, because I want to know this answer too. Okay. Let me process. I need to be able to process things. If I say it, it's a representation that I'm not actually thought about it. I guess it's, who are you when you're being who you're meant to be?
And is that something you're applying to yourself or to all people? To yourself?
To myself and all people as well.
But especially to yourself.
But it's to myself. So it's this, because I think, again, it goes back to this positive self-concept. It's like, actually, when you know that, and it changes, it's not linear, it's changing all the time. But when you ask yourself that enough, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to reflect on this question now, then there's this, because to the point that we spoke about probably at the beginning of the conversation, when you're trying to achieve something and you're frustrated because you haven't got to that end goal, you haven't got to that, like, oh my God, that next accomplishment. But if you can recognize, though, I'm entirely being the person that I need to be to do that, there's literally nothing more that you can do.
And I noticed you asked that question in the second person.
Yeah.
Who are you when you're being?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Is that on purpose?
Yeah, I think so, because I think there is a duality of myself, of being in order for me to allow myself to be this thing that can change, I do believe in thinking of things in a very spectrum-based way, in a non-binary way. And so I speak to that future version of myself and I'm asking it for wisdom. And then I can identify with it. But I think for me, in terms of, I love that quote, you can't change things at the, it's the Einstein quote, at the level of thought. You can't solve things at the level of thought that created them.
Yeah.
So
Love
when
it.
I say who am I being, it feels like I'm accessing current levels of thinking to solve that. Whereas when I say who are you being, when you're being, it feels like I'm almost sitting out trying to do a third, like the ghost of myself looking down and trying to access a new level of thinking to solve that. And then I can look at it and be like, is this it? Do I identify with that? If not, why? But if so, like, okay, this is who I am being, and then I can identify with it.
I love that. And the purpose of this is to help us bring out these reflective questions for yourself and also for everyone listening. So I'm glad that it's given you a chance to, the prompting to go reflect on that. That's really cool. Look, Tashan, I really appreciate you. This has been really good. This episode has flown by.
Yeah.
We talked about some really cool things, and I really appreciate everything you shared with all of us. So thank you so much. Where should people go to learn more about you, or wherever you want to send them? All the links will be down there.
Yeah.
Where do you want to consciously point people to?
Oh my God. To be honest, LinkedIn's probably the best place to communicate with me, which is hilarious. It's not very, it's probably, LinkedIn. Or Instagram at Relight Coaching. I have a website, www.relight.co.uk. I love a chat. So just have a chat. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'll put all that stuff down there.
No,
thank you so much. Everyone should go do that. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great night.
No, thank you so much.
Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope you found it valuable. We've reached a number of really important milestones on this show already. It's only been a couple of months, but I'm so grateful to those of you who not only subscribe, but also who listen this far along, who leave the comments on posts, or who give me really powerful, beautiful messages in response. It's been a humbling journey, and there is so much more to come. If there's something about this episode and the question that we answered, or any of the learnings that you took away that you want to make sure someone else you know understands themselves, then please do share this episode with them, along with your reflections, teaching other people something that you learned, passing the information on, or even just writing it down for yourself. All help you retain the answers to this, and any inspiration it gave you even more. That's the purpose of all this, is to give you as much positive, powerful, impactful results as possible on your journey to developing your own inner leader from so many different dimensions, not just the one we've talked about today. So thank you so much for being here, sending lots of love, and here's to your success.